Capitalism. We have to destroy capitalism completely. It does not serve our needs. It does not serve the working class.
Despite Sanders being 75 years old, he claims to be in good health, and it is not unlikely that he may run for president again in 2020, if he remains healthy. Running a presidential campaign is a demanding task for anyone and requires a large amount of stamina, especially for someone of older age is quite impressive and indicative of good health, which he claims to have. Whether he does or doesn't decide to run again, it is important to point out some very true facts about the current political landscape. For one, the socialist platform he was fighting for during the campaign has not necessarily died with the death of his 2016 campaign. Most, if not all, his ideas are still being fought for by leftist groups. Since his presidential campaign, he's been appointed to a Senate Democrat leader position and has become the most popular senator in the country. The same can't be said for the Democratic Party. A favorable approval rating of the party is only at 39.5% favorability as of March 22, 2017. Most Americans have an unfavorable view of the party, polling at 50.3% unfavorability. Trump also has an historically low favorability approval rating, polling at 37% as of March 20th, 2017. This can be for several reasons. Taking into consideration millennials are the largest voting group in the country, and the fact that they are mostly left-leaning may have large implications as to why his approval ratings are as low as it is. But note that the speculation doesn't take into consideration all the other possibilities as to why he has such low approval ratings, and it's simply my opinion, based upon what I know. The next election is a few years away, but I sense that the current political landscape will not change much so long as President Trump doesn't get involved in a scandal controversial enough that an impeachment will be necessary, or if he can somehow gain a huge boost in popularity amongst the public. The Democrats have little popularity, thus little influential power on an individual level amongst the public, more precisely people on the left. I predict that if Senate Democrats do not align with the Bernie wing of the party, they will continue to have low approval ratings. The biggest voting group in the US are millennials, and most millennials are on the left. They can be categorized into several ideological groups. These groups are not inherently bad, but the farther left on the political spectrum they sit, they can be potentially menacing for individual rights. These are the groups that can be examined: liberalism, socialism, and communist ideologues. It is important in recognizing these specific groups and not just bunching them together as simply the left. These groups have different ideas and interests. Categorizing them together is counterproductive to an opposition movement trying to gain supporters. These differences are self-explanatory to anyone familiar with this political spectrum. The prospect of another Sanders campaign or a campaign with a candidate with the same socialist agenda is not unlikely. The appeal that these ideas garner in leftist intellectual groups are still extremely popular, and many grassroots third-party movements are beginning to pop up, such as Our Revolution, Justice Democrats, and several others that will be identified later. While these are all separate liberal/progressive movements, most of them are entwined with socialist agendas, such as socialist healthcare reforms, more corporate regulations that will further cripple small businesses, higher taxes, and bigger government. Despite these being oppressive economic policies for individual rights, these groups are continuing to grow at a rate that is alarming for anyone not affiliated with them. If they continue to grow, by the time the next election cycle begins, they can have massive swaying capabilities in favor of their own interests. These interests are not American values at heart, although progressives will claim that they are. I will define what a progressive is later. These political groups continue to grow because of their agendas. Marxist ideals, which are extremely appealing to young people, the people becoming involved with these movements, are not usually consciously aware of Marxism's oppressive nature. If the economic and social policies of Marxism are implemented, we can potentially have an economic disaster and perhaps a restriction on personal speech and liberty. Not by Bernie or whoever the next Democratic president might be, but by the progressive groups coming from the far left who seek to silence political opponents at all costs.
I think there's a lot of people that are around the Bernie Sanders campaign that are open to ideas of really getting rid of capitalism, not just reforming it. But it only goes so far. I mean, let's say he wins the presidency, there'll be a few reforms here and there, there'll be like higher wages, but people are still being exploited because anytime people have to work for a wage, they're being ripped off. That money's going to profit, and there's not enough money for them to buy what they need.
None of these different groups should be taken lightly and should be treated as serious political opponents no matter what. How to combat these groups effectively will be discussed after each group is identified. Like stated earlier, not everyone affiliated with the left have the same goals. It can even be argued that a lot of these people are ignorant to their cause and what they are doing is simply following the crowd. This may apply to people less politically involved and more interested in politics for social issues the left proudly stands for, such as gay marriage, legalization of pot, and immigration reform. A lot of these individuals are mostly unaware of the economic issues pertaining to politics. As a libertarian, I see this as a huge benefit for gaining supporters. As I am not actively against any of Sanders' social policies, this variable of ignorance can help influence some people who currently identify with liberals, for the sake of being called liberals, over to the libertarian idea. We can call these voters swing voters because most of these individuals are not radical ideologues. Liberalism is not the same as progressivism. A person who claims to be a liberal is only truly beholden to liberal values if they're willing to fight for free speech, even if they disapprove of someone else's rhetoric. As a libertarian, I am also beholden to this idea. But this is not the idea endorsed by progressives. And this is where I define what the progressive movement has turned into. Progressives will seek to silence political opponents by protesting public speakers, kicking people out of public spaces, and viewing anyone not beholden to the same ideas as bad people. An example would be anyone who voted for Trump is racist, which is clearly delusional, discriminatory, and collectivist, because it fails to explain economic reasons as to why people voted for Trump. They will accuse them of being racist, misogynistic, homophobic, etc. It fails to consider that some people might be angry over losing their jobs under Obama's presidency, which may or may not be his fault, which is a completely different topic. Economic reasons as to why people vote Trump are not as apparent in Miami and South Florida as it is in northern parts of the state. South Florida has the largest economy when compared to the rest of Florida. Progressives have developed a dangerous collectivist mindset. All white men and women are oppressive, and any group that has historically been oppressed should be granted special privileges. This collectivist attitude is solely seen through the lens of skin color, and is incompatible with individualism. In other words, people are not judged by the content of their character anymore, but by the color of their skin, the opposite of the words spoken out of the mouth of the late Dr. Martin Luther King. By the time 2020 rolls around, millennials will still be the largest voting group in the country. If we allow socialist grassroots movements that attract this voting bloc to grow without opposition, these groups will gain huge influential power over government. A large portion of these groups are made up of progressives, people not beholden to traditional values, although they may claim that their ideology is morally superior, which is wrong because suppression of free speech is dangerous and oppressive. Not all these groups are the same, and tend to advocate for different movements such as feminism and social justice. They all have an outer cloak of Marxist ideals and the idea of equal outcome, not equal opportunity. It is important to note that I don't speak on behalf of self-proclaimed progressives. I'm using the term progressive to describe this group because this is what the progressive movement has made itself to be on the internet. These ideological movements as of March 23, 2017 are mostly part of an ongoing culture war in Western society that has seeded itself in college campuses and on the internet, and is slowly seeping into new legislations in places like Canada and some areas in the United States. When observing from a sociological perspective, these groups exhibit cult-like behaviors. They have developed a sort of groupthink, and anyone that turns away from this groupthink mentality will be outcasted and labeled as a racist. When exploring progressive ideals, it is easy to see how they can develop this mentality. Their ideas assume a moral high ground. They are obviously in support of minority groups and are more than likely well-intentioned. After all, being supportive of the poor is at the end of the day something noble, and standing up for groups that historically have been oppressed is equally so. The roots of where these movements came from can be traced back to progressive movements in the 60s, but that is an entirely different topic. The point being is that even though the individuals involved with progressivism are well-intentioned, it is the means by which they try to reach their political objectives that is dangerous. It is easy to outcast someone who doesn't line up with their beliefs because they see their beliefs to be morally superior. The case is that progressives are not bad people. They have just been influenced by cult behaviors but are well-intentioned individuals. It is important to remember that these groups all have different agendas. I will only include left-wing movements that are potentially destructive of American values because they make up the majority. These groups are blanketed by political correctness and Marxist ideologies. Here are some progressive groups with their descriptions I could find that have popped up in recent years and are gaining influence. Democratic Socialists of America. Democratic Socialists believe that both the economy and society should be run democratically to meet human needs, not to make profits for a few. We are a political and activist organization, not a party. through campus and community-based chapters. DSA members use a variety of tactics from legislative to direct action to fight for reform that empower working people. This sounds like a noble movement, but so do all socialist movements, and that's the great irony of socialism. It sounds beautiful and fair, and it's not that I'm so opposing to socialism that I don't want it to work. It's just the case that through all the research I've done, I can see through historical evidence that it leads to oppression and societies that look like they're part of a real nightmare. Our Revolution is an American progressive political action organization spun out of Senator Sanders' 2016 presidential campaign to continue its work. Justice Democrats. This is probably the newest group founded by Cenk Uygur of TYT and Kyle Kulinski of Secular Talk. This one's quite complicated. I initially found myself in support of this group because of my first impression of it. I even donated $3.30. But then as time went on, I realized that this was just another social justice group, and I realized that it just doesn't represent my views. Black Lives Matter. No, I'm not a racist for being in opposition to this group. I think that the sentiment behind this group's creation is very noble in representing the loss of life due to people in authority, but I find it to be a horrible atrocity when anyone is killed by the negligence and irresponsibility of another person. I believe that all lives are equal, and the name Black Lives Matter just creates an us versus them dynamic to the people in authority, which is dangerous. We can see this in many cases like the one involving Corinne Gaines, the girl who had pointed a shotgun at police officers after purposely missing a court date for a ticket. It's gotten to the point that saying all lives matter has become a racist sentiment, which is pretty concerning. I think all lives matter equally. Black Lives Matter has been getting a lot of negativity on the internet lately. Fortunately, I think it's because people are realizing this. When you search Black Lives Matter on YouTube, the first videos that come up are videos critiquing and poking fun of Black Lives Matter. Seriously, go search it. Here we get into the part of the video of what we can do for those that are politically involved to oppose these groups. Now, I want to make it clear that I'm not against all liberal movements. I may have many disagreements with their economic ideas, but I am all for the idea of free speech, and I think it is wrong to infringe on anyone's right of free speech even if I disagree with it. I'm mostly opposed in every way to groups that seek to censor others because of a disagreement, or groups that can just lead to that sort of ideology, which is what I'm seeing from progressivism. And I'm not the only one. Many liberals, libertarians, and conservatives are seeing this too. There have been many cases of conservative professors being silenced by students on college campuses simply because they don't agree with their views. Mind you, conservative professors are a minority in college campuses. I also understand that I'm in the minority of my fellow millennial brothers and sisters, and that I might even receive a lot of flack for coming out with a video like this. But understand that I'm entering this political war with the intent of trying to make peace between the left and right in America. I 100% believe that we can achieve our goals as individuals, and I believe in what Dr. Martin Luther King said. I look to a day when people will not be judged by the color of the skin, but by the content of the character. And yes, that includes every single ethnic group out there. Strategy and tactics are two different concepts. Strategy is the overall objective, which would be to always remain in the moral high ground. Tactics would be the way the strategy is executed. Always take the moral high ground. If you know someone is doing something wrong against you for using your free speech, never resort to violence or name-calling. If you stand your ground and become the victim of your attacker, understand you aren't really a victim. You have made your political opponent look like the aggressor and made yourself to be innocent by remaining morally superior. An eye for an eye would make everybody blind. This is the strategy that to me looks to be the most effective in a culture war, and was the same strategy used by Dr. King and Gandhi. It's just hard to look like a cause worth following by attacking people that are essentially innocent. For example, I've been attacked by people on the internet for speaking out against socialism. And by people part of the same group, I was then accused of being racist because I have white skin. I'm not offended by this at all. I retweeted the specific person in the hopes that those who follow me on Twitter would see the nonsense of these kind of people and denounce them, seeing that the things they are saying are an unfair way of judging people. The goal is preventing these groups from getting larger. And now we get into the tactics. Exploit your persecutor. When being attacked by someone unfairly, don't just choose to block or ignore them. Although this would be a better tactic than to go on the offensive, it's important to understand what their objective may be. With some people, there's no reasoning with. They will always hate you for being a different skin color than them, or having a different opinion than they do. Others may seek to be claiming the moral high ground themselves by provoking you into getting on the offensive and making you seem like the one being unfair. Don't fall into their trap by getting angry. Always try to realize when you're being unfairly persecuted and exploit this opportunity. Take screenshots of the conversation and post it up on whatever social media platform you're most familiar with. Being called a white supremacist for simply having white skin is an example of when you can use this tactic. Take a screenshot of this and post it on Instagram, Twitter, whatever. If you fear someone in the comment section might attack you for this is more power to you. You should realize that it is unfair being judged just by your skin color. And the people that might attack you in the comment section are also in the wrong in this situation. Be aware of cancerous identity politics. Don't fall into the trap of identity politics that has been prevailing in modern culture. I'm not telling you what you should or shouldn't believe, but when you engage in identity politics, you become part of the problem that we face today. It is wrong to think that someone is inferior or superior to someone else simply because of the skin color they have or where they're from. But it isn't wrong to criticize culture. It is true that some cultures are better than others, which is different from someone's identity. Culture is adopted and can and should be changed when the circumstances require it. An example would be someone coming from a country with an oppressive culture coming to the United States. In the United States, we do not tolerate oppression of any kind, and maintaining those traditions should not be tolerated. And here's my last point. Use comedy as a weapon. Using comedy to prove a point is a powerful tool. Some things being advocated for are just plain funny, and should be seen that way. I mean, is anyone supposed to take milk as a symbol of racism serious? I don't think so, and the claim is so absurd, it should be laughed at appropriately so. In closing, I want to encourage anyone out there with the ability to be able to think for themselves to combat these social justice groups. And I'm sure you keyboard warriors out there have already devised ways of combating these groups much more effectively than I have even thought of. I just want to stress the importance of maintaining the moral high ground at all costs. Essentially, that's what these progressives are trying to do. But it's becoming harder and harder for them to do because their cult-like behavior is beginning to eat itself from the inside out, and people are becoming aware of this. I guess I was once a social justice warrior because I believed that what I was doing was for the right cause, but I didn't realize that I was just following a crowd and not thinking for myself. As I did more research into socialism and communism, I began to realize that even though it sounds like the grand savior of the working class, it's extremely destructive to it and restricting. Yes, it does stress that everyone should be equal, but who gets to decide what equal is? It's a biological fact that men and women are different, and to try to argue that we're equal in every single way is absurd. This is just an example, but this is some of the stuff that's coming out of the far left today. I think it's a better argument that both genders have their own strengths and weaknesses, and as to what those strengths and weaknesses are, is a different discussion. But the point is that not everyone can be equal all the time. Some people are just lucky and born into rich families, and some are not as lucky, but that's just how life is. It's important to just make the best of our lives and what we have. I'm not saying that the system we have here in the United States is perfect. It needs adjustments, but it sure is a hell of a lot better than that of Cuba or North Korea. What the left really needs to do is wake up. People are getting tired of its absurdities. They're getting tired of being called racist because they don't want people coming in from different countries for economic reasons. American citizens should have the right to decide who gets in and who doesn't, without being labeled bigoted. It's probably a big reason why so many right-wing European governments are being elected. With all this being said, I don't think most people on the left are badly intentioned. They're good people with concerns of their own. In fact, I agree with most of them on most social issues. It's just the economic ones that I find not to my liking. So I can find common ground with probably almost every liberal in the West. If you made it this far into the video, thank you for taking your time to do so. I don't expect everyone watching to agree with everything I've said. And if you're on the far left, that's cool too. Continue fighting for your cause. Just don't try to censor people you disagree with. Leave a comment below on what you thought of this video. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a dislike.